those relationships that are built within a community are so lasting. They're rooted with who you are as a person, being Filipino. That's why for us, like growing up in Scarborough and here, like, I don't know about you, but I'm mad proud to be Filipino.
Oh,
like,
yeah, totally.
super proud to be Filipino. And not only am I just, but everyone in my circle is. Everyone around you is. So when you're building generations of people in that sort of mindset, then the culture continues and it just keeps going.
Mabuhay and welcome back to the channel. My name is Tez Milan. I am a Filipino-American creative here in Toronto, Canada. And today I'm on my way to what is considered to be Little Manila. And I'm meeting up with some new friends and we're going to chat about how the Filipinos ended up there.
There's Filipinos everywhere, eh?
It'll blow your mind, like, to hear about where all, like, Filipinos are and where they're from.
The fastest growing population of newcomers in Canada in, like, the most, like, remote areas. So, like, the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut. They're just, like, really far north of here.
Yeah.
Are Filipinos. And Filipinos are just choosing, like, the hard jobs.
So, like, Thunder Bay and
Thunder Bay,
like,
yeah.
random, like, really random places. They're the ones going there.
Exactly. I don't know if it's part of the culture, but a lot of it definitely has to do with the fact that, like, they're willing to take jobs that are not the most glamorous.
Like, the Philippines wants you to do it. They want you to go out there, leave the Philippines, and bring money back. That's what they want. They want you to do that. They're like, oh, trying to provide jobs for Filipinos in the Philippines? It's okay. We don't need to.
Just go elsewhere.
Just go somewhere else.
You know, I heard the biggest portion of the Philippines' GDP comes from immigrants sending money back
Yes. That's
to the
right.
Philippines, which is crazy.
That is the truth.
That's why you'll see a lot of, like, money remittent businesses in the area.
Most of the ads that I get on YouTube are for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't speak or understand Tagalog,
Tagalog,
unfortunately.
yeah.
They're always in Tagalog, so I'm always like listening and going, okay, wait, I got that word.
I understand Tagalog, yeah, but I can't really speak it that well.
Same.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, my mom is Bicolana, so
Yeah. So same.
yeah.
Were you born here? You were born here, right?
I was born here, yeah.
Do you know what year your mom came?
She came here in 94.
That's when the height of this community started to be built. This is the 90s.
The 90s, yeah. She was a caregiver, yeah. So she came here on the caregiver program. They get sponsored by a family living in the area here. It's a similar story for a lot of newcomers that land here in this particular area. She gets partnered with, like, a Jewish family, and she takes care of their kids, the house. They're normally live-in caregivers, so they would live in the house. I'm not too sure with regards to how every caregiver's experience went.
Yeah.
I'm assuming someone good, some didn't go
Yeah.
so well. Being a caregiver, you're in such an integral part of a kid's growth.
Yeah.
Because you're probably seeing the kid sometimes more often
Than
than
their
the
own
parents
kids.
will, right?
Yeah.
Give them Filipino food, like, teaching them about a little bit about a culture outside themselves is pretty big, because, like, that's how they
Yeah.
grew up now, and they kind of, like, appreciate it. So there's definitely a symbiotic relationship here with a lot of the Jewish community and Filipinos here as well. There's definitely a mutual appreciation.
And in the 2000s, early 2000s, and then onwards is when they started to really claim, like, Toronto was like, this is it. This is
Appreciate
Little Manila.
I think that's what's blowing my mind is that everything is so recent.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's very recent. You were talking about all of these things, and I was like, Little Manila, and I was like, oh, it must be at least like 50 years old. She's like, no, it's actually like 20?
The 90s.
Yeah, 90s.
Yeah.
And I was like,
20 odd years.
so
yeah.
basically you were born when it was all starting to
Come up.
develop.
Yeah, 100%. It's still building gradually. I think the interesting thing is, like, Filipinos get here, they get into a certain line of work, and then they have kids now. So now it's the second generation that's being born. So now they're going to school here, they're born here, and then now they're going to college here. So things are starting to, like, the second generation is happening. But you're right, like, the initial landing spot of most Filipinos here was just really recent.
And the 90s
Really,
is here.
the 90s, yeah.
My family came in the 70s, 80s. Pierre Trudeau's dad,
yeah.
he opened up the gates of immigration. The wave before that, they only wanted professionals.
Wow.
Then they're like, okay, all those professionals, if you have children that are still
appreciate
single or are under the certain age,
Yeah.
you all can come. So it wasn't just Filipinos that did it.
Yeah, mention that.
It was all everywhere and in the world could come and do the exact same thing. The Chinese, the Vietnamese, like everybody. They just opened all the doors. Come on in, open the floodgates, everybody. You could have zero qualifications. You didn't go to school, you could come to Canada. As long as you were related to someone who was sponsoring you here. You didn't have to have anything. You just have to pass a medical. That's it.
Damn.
That was all. Most of their children who were born in Canada were born around 1975 to 77. It'd be rare that you'll find like a person born in Canada in like the 60s.
Yeah, 100%.
It's mostly like the
It is rare.
70s and onwards where you have Canadian-born kids. So those guys now have kids who are in college. That's
Yeah.
as far as our immigration has gone.
Like, how do you feel about like how the culture was carried for you?
But it's definitely reinforced by virtue of just growing up in this neighborhood.
I find that very special.
So that helps a lot. At home, you carry on the traditions. It gets reinforced by going to school, your friend groups. You
Yeah.
kind of get accustomed to the culture.
Special part about this community and Scarborough, they're the only communities where their schools were heavily populated by Filipinos. They're the only two communities. When I was in high school, we did like a census, and 30% of this population was Filipino.
I bet it even grew afterwards.
Yeah, so those are the two communities in Toronto, just heavily encompassed by Filipinos. And just because of the timeline of when their families came to Canada is the reason why those two areas versus like people who live in like North York, Vaughan, Mississauga, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They were all kind of spread out,
Yeah.
and they weren't just going to one high school. You would go into a class, and for sure when you were in school, like I would ref at Marshall,
Oh, yeah.
All the
You
time.
would know.
and every time I'd walk into that school, like the benches full of just Filipinos and watching the basketball games.
Yeah.
It was like everyone's Filipino in there. It was wild.
It was wild.
Filipino was the majority.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely majority.
You weren't even feeling like a minority. Like everybody was Filipino.
That's the complete opposite of how I grew up.
I was going to say, you probably experienced the polar opposite of that.
Polar opposite.
Yeah.
I was one of two in a class of 700, and even her and I weren't really friends.
It
Damn.
was wild.
I'll give you an example. Like the elementary school that's close by, they did a census about 80% Filipino right now.
And you said that it's growing
They had to actually split up the school into two different campuses
because it's growing so much.
because it's grown so much. With regards to like the cost of living now, it's definitely sort of shaping how the neighborhood is going to shape up for the next 20 years at least. It's kind of shifting a lot of like second gen Filipinos to kind of move towards the edges of the city.
A lot of families land here, but then the next generation, they tend
Yeah.
to move to the suburbs. Is it because it's cheaper?
For sure. There are still some families that stay in this area.
Do you feel like you're going to stay here and live here? Like, do you feel really
Yeah,
like rooted and connected to your community?
definitely feel connected to the community. I'd love to stay here or find a way to live here. Yeah, I just think there's a lot of potential here to grow as a community for especially not only the newcomers, but people who are trying to start a life here
Yeah.
as well.
Do you feel that your peers feel the same, who are also Filipino? Do they really?
Yeah.
Or are they like, no, we want to get out of here?
You want to get out of here? I'd say like the vast majority of
Some.
people I know in this area here, they definitely want to stay here. Having a community is so big. Like if you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself,
Yeah.
you can kind of feel at home, even withstanding the fact that you may not live in a situation where it's ideal, right? They would rather that be in a community versus moving elsewhere, starting all over again. So there's something to be said for being part of a community that you feel like connected to. I think that's the main reason why so many people would rather stay.
Somehow there's something that's drawing them to still land here only because there's so many of them. And then
Yeah.
if they choose to branch out, they can. You want to own a house here, it's going to be really difficult.
It is tough.
It's going to be very, very
It is
hard.
tough.
You're looking for sure like a small house, like in the millions.
How long has your family been in the area?
I think she got here early 90s. She met my dad at the church. And then they bought the place where I'm at in like early 90s, like 93, 94. It's definitely gentrified for sure. There's been recent pushback though. Homeowners are saying like, it's not keeping with the character of the neighborhood.
You see them building everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And tearing down a lot of these older buildings.
Currently, our subway system is getting expanded. There's going to be a line that's going to come right through this area. There's some parts of the tracks going right by people's houses. The communities are going to either have to say yes or no. And so half of the time, they're like, they don't even have choice. They're just going to go right through it.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. So like stuff like, you know, in New York and whatever that happened long, long time, like it's only happening now. In the community, you build relationships that are like long lasting. It's because when Filipino communities become larger and the population is bigger, it's easier for you to say, yeah, I am Filipino, because you're standing beside 5 others
Yeah.
that say the same thing. If you're standing by yourself, I'm the only Filipino, there's so many factors like racism. You could be hated more if you said you're Filipino. You don't know.
So did you never have an experience of like, gosh, I shouldn't say I'm Filipino?
There was definitely a period in my life where I had an identity crisis because I'm half white, right? Just not understanding where I belonged. I think that it's important to look at yourself in a blend of views. You're not always just this identity.
Yeah, like saying you're Filipino from Scarborough to me makes a
Yeah.
difference between you're Filipino from where he's from.
The Philippines, yeah, or here as well.
Here
Yeah,
and here.
exactly.
The population, the people, who you're around, the different kind of communities that you're from, it makes a difference. If you grew up with a lot of other cultures around you, like that shaped you, who you are. Being in Scarborough, you had friends who were Jamaican, Trini, and Caribbean or Indian. So then you end up going to their houses for dinner and eating and learning African. Like everyone was different, so you would then make friends of people with different cultures, and everybody was their own pride of who they were. Not only are you just Filipino, you're Filipino-Canadian, and what your Canadian part of you is.
The community that you grow up in.
It's kind of weird. We're in Canada, we're in Toronto, and I'm like the minority skin color wise, right? So
Yeah.
it took me a while to like, okay, I don't really look like these guys, but I still feel a part of the community. And even if I'm not Filipino half at all, I would still feel a part of the community just by virtue of growing up in
Where
that
you grew
culture,
up.
right? You adopt things through your circle. I still feel like I'm part of it anyway. You can kind of speak to that for a lot of people who are not Filipino growing up in this community as well. It's like a mini Philippines here.
Little Manila.
Yeah, Little Manila, that's
yeah,
why it is.
Little Manila, yeah. I think at the time I just didn't quite understand the differences. I kind of saw it in the dichotomous thinking where it was like one or the other versus they're a bit of both. That's kind of something I came to terms with later on in life, just like learning how to like grapple with my identity. Having other people who share a same sort of values you do, that helps you feel like you're part of something bigger, and that helps you feel more at
Be
home.
more secure of who you
Yeah.
are.
And regardless of what culture you're in, or regardless of what you identify as, you share a same set of values that can help you just feel more at peace or welcome. Being Filipino though was something that I didn't really come to terms with till later on, like in high school. Just because I wasn't sure if I would be accepted in like my white culture as well, vice versa as well, of course. That's something I kind of came to terms with just as a product of growing up.
It's very similar to growing up in Canada as well. You feel that same difference. I had to really understand my roots of who I was as a person, my family's roots. I had to know those things so that I could feel more connected to being Filipino. I didn't feel as connected. Even though we had other Filipinos grow up here, and we're all, yes, Filipino, but what is it? How Filipino are you?
Right.
Were you born here? Were you not born here? Like, all those kind of things play factors into how immersed you are into the culture. That makes a big difference. I didn't feel any connections until I went back. That's when I would make the connections with my family out there. And then getting close with them and them explaining to me, like when I'm over there, like I'm so foreign, like to them, and then they don't see me as Filipino, they see me as Canadian. We're blood relatives.
Yes. Yeah.
We're blood.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I'm Canadian.
Yeah.
They're Filipino. And there was always a divide. And I would ask them, like, why do we always have to have a divide? Like, because there is. They just said, like,
Wow.
well, we love you the way you are,
Right.
but you're not us. And I'm not you. You're never going to understand the struggles that I went through growing up in the Philippines, and she won't ever understand the struggles that I grew up, like being a Filipino as a minority in Canada, period.
Right,
That's just,
right. Fair enough.
I think that's where everyone needs to like accept or just understand. That's a whole other world of what people my generation were trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah.
And now that I kind of figured out what it is, it's more like, okay, I feel confident in saying to my child, like, yeah, you are Filipino-Canadian, and this is how you got here. And when he knows it at a young age, he'll then feel secure in himself, and he won't feel lost when he's talking to other cultures and other people. Like, it's going to be a whole other world of exploring and understanding that you are this person. So, like, you are Filipino-American, and your roots are there, but, you know, you are Filipino.
Yeah.
But in your own way. I feel that's the same kind of divide as to like my cousins in the Philippines. They're Filipino from the Philippines.
Yeah.
I'm Filipino-Canadian. You're Filipino-American. We're all Filipino in some way, but there are divides. And that's okay. We should just be okay with the divide and not saying that you're more Filipino than me or I'm more Filipino than you. We are just what we are. Genetically, we both have two Filipino parents. You got one, but you're not less Filipino than I am in the culture, you know, and who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And that's really the message that like needs to continue to kind of like grow in the Filipino community.
Like she said, like you're Filipino in your own way, and you kind of create that identity through your unique upbringing. Because no one can do Filipino one particular way.
in one particular way.
That's why it's so important, I feel like, for us to propel that in the next generation,
Mhm.
so that there is a sense of belonging,
Yeah.
or a sense where people can navigate the world in their own sense now, where they're like,
Yeah.
okay, you know what, I got my own 2 feet, I can decide how I want to be Filipino, or how I want to be this, you know?
How you want to represent outside of where you were. Like, we're all
Yeah.
going to be people who meet other people. Everyone has their own story. So you're here to tell your story, and that's huge. Same with every other culture. Like, if I speak to any of my friends who are Nigerian or Jamaican, Chinese, Vietnamese, everyone's going through the same thing because we're all children of immigrants who've all come from their own place to come here. Then you start to explore cultures of different people. And, well, I kind of identify more with this culture than another culture.
At the end of the day, Canada is a land of immigrants. Like, white dudes have only been here since the 1800s. So think of it like that. There's only a 200-year history here of people versus, like, there were indigenous here way before.
Way before.